So good afternoon to everyone. We have the pleasure today to have guest Sabrina Pietrobono from Rome, and you can find like previous presentations online, videos, in two parts about the presentation and about the discussions. And after this presentation, we can offer like others previous appointments, delicious and informal part of wine and meals in the audience room. So, Sabrina Pietrobono is official archaeologist at MiBACT, Ministero dei Beni e delle Attività Culturali e del Turismo, and for the Villa Adriana and Villa d'Este in Tivoli. She has a bachelor in classics at the University of Sapienza and a specialization in Christian archaeology at the Pontificio Instituto di Archeologia Cristiana. And he had PhD in medical archaeology at the University of L'Aquila. And she held regularly seminars on methods of topographical studies of the ancient world. She was a Marie Curie Fellow as a landscape archaeologist, and for 2 years she was research at northeast of England and Southern Lazio and Campania. And today she presents this seminar as a her work, her project, and in particular about the method, the new method, an English method, a GIS tool for interdisciplinary landscape studies. This is very interesting, for this contribute aims to show the range of possibilities provided by GIS method elaborated in UK and recently applied to the Italian context. At the moment, conventionally covered historic landscape characterization.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Okay. I'm trying to summarize some different, I'm giving to you some different points to think about. I would like to present you this method, which is not very new method. It means it was developed in England by the British archaeologists, specifically in Cornwall, in Devon, in southern England. So during my research at Newcastle University, I developed in Italy, I tried to experiment this new method, this British method in England, in Italy. And so I developed this project called the Unlink Project. And during this work, I discovered the difference between the Italian landscape archaeology and the British landscape archaeology. And it is important to understand this difference. It is important to better know the European Landscape Convention, first of all, and to use this method. It is also important to learn something about the GIS. This is useful. This is necessary to realize a characterization of the landscape, which can be a landscape characterization assessment, for instance, but in my case it will be an HLC, an historic landscape characterization. And I will introduce to you my Unlink project. I will show you some types, some example of types, which is the main instrument and the main feature to realize this method. And at the end, I would like to ask you, I would like to sum up my presentation, my seminar, but I would like also to ask you something about what you have understood. So what is landscape archaeology? First of all, it's a big question, it's a big deal. So I quote in this slide what Graham Fairclough from Newcastle University and the former English Heritage think about landscape archaeology, because landscape archaeology is something really big. It covers a very range of possibilities. It can be a survey can be a tool for landscape archaeology, no? Which is perhaps the best known tool to study the landscape. But there can be also from prehistoric research, can be also environment can be also really important. So we can use different discipline, putting everything together. We can study the landscape from a geomorphological point of view. We can study the landscape from an environmental point of view. We can study the landscape in many different ways. So depending on which way and also from which schools you are studying into, you can also have a different perspective about landscape archaeologists. So for a British archaeologist, landscape archaeologist is now primarily a knowledge or research-based discipline. So you can develop your own way to study the landscape. Landscape archaeology can be geographically different, and it can have a different way of understanding in different countries. And when I approach the British this British method, I realized that in England and also in Scotland, in all the British islands, there was a completely different vision of landscape archaeology. It was more theoretical, and in Italy we don't have we are not accustomed to think theoretically about the landscape, unfortunately. So this was my big step, understanding the theory. I mean, what does it mean thinking about phenomenology in the landscape or something like that? I didn't have this kind of background because I grew up in the school of history and topography of the University of Rome, which basically means landscape archaeology as ancient topography. So your aim is to produce cartography and for the management on the landscape, and it was a big step for me to understand this kind of this theoretical perspective. But it was important because I needed to realize a specific aspect about this method, the necessity to interpret the landscape. And in Italy, my experience was strictly practical and materialistic, I can say, materialistic. I mean, really physical, studying structure, studying walls, making carrying out surveys, so cataloging, making inventory, so really, really practical. In Britain, the vision was absolutely wider, no? And a kind. Now we can say holistic, from a certain, to embrace everything you could study as useful for the comprehension of the landscape. And so basically, I agree when in Italy someone now is saying there is a little landscape in the Italian landscape archaeology today, because we still miss this holistic vision. We are trying to get it, but we are still studying and developing this new conception, these new ideas. And the main point now is, what is landscape? I mean, we are talking about landscape, but basically we don't understand sometimes we don't understand very well the meaning of this word, landscape. And that's another difference. In Italy, when we talk about landscape, we talk about paesaggio, which means something slightly different from the landscape, the vision of the land that you can imagine using this word landscape taken from the English language. So we must understand that Italians and British archaeologists come from different backgrounds, and they can have, and this can affect even talking to each other about the landscape can be difficult, because the idea is totally different. Thanks to the Council of Europe, at a certain point, they decided to write a convention called the European Landscape Convention. It was signed in 2000 and was accepted in England, in the UK, and in Italy at the same time in 2006. It's a very important moment in our discipline, because this convention defined the landscape as an area as perceived by people whose character is the result of the action and the interaction of natural and or human factors. In this convention, so we find the word character of the landscape, first of all. So this area, which is in Italian, it was translated at first as a kind of a peculiar area, something to, people tried to reduce this extensive vision landscape, because in the British mentality, the landscape is everything, and this is the holistic aspect of the landscape. Everything is landscape. In Italy, there is a difficulty, because even now, archaeologists are studying rural landscape, medieval landscapes. So you need something like a need. You know? You try to dissect and separate the landscape in several different pieces, but this is not the real idea that we must work with. And in the same convention, and Article 6, we found the terms identification and assessment, which are both important. We must identify the landscape and we must assess the landscape, and everything to understand the landscape. Speaking about characterization means, first of all, to understand also how to manage this landscape. No? How do we get a good comprehension of the landscape, no? Of this character of landscape? We can use different methods. I put on the slide two methods, which are the landscape character assessment and the HLC, the historical landscape characterization. The landscape character assessment is something more linked to the environment and to the landscape in general. When you talk about historical landscape characterization, you are talking about a different tool related, more strictly related to the historical dimension of the landscape. Now, in the next slide, we can understand. We can better understand these 2 points. Both these methods are based on GIS, which means Geographical Information System. I think very few people now don't know anything about the GIS. GIS is a system where you can link together and managing and presenting, displaying a lot of spatial data and several different forms of geographical information. And this basically, in my case, meant to work on maps, historical maps, first of all, linking to these historical maps several different information coming from documents, coming from surveys, and so on. And I put this slide just to understand, to let you understand the sequence of layers that you can recognize inside the GIS. This slide is an example and of a specific LHC landscape characterization assessment provided by the University of Copenhagen, stating different stages. So first of all, this kind of characterization aimed to define the scope and describe landscape character. Basically considering natural and cultural environment, spatial and perceptual features, and basically the landscape is mapped using areas, considering areas. This method was applied, the principle of this method was applied in Tuscany, which is basically the first region, Italian region, that organized a specific piano paesaggistico. The piano paesaggistico is the main tool to understand and to manage the landscape in Italy. Basically, 3 regions in Italy have now this kind of plan, and all the other regions are trying to complete their own plans. But the situation is not so good at the moment. Unfortunately, we are still waiting for. You see, the Carta dei Caratteri del Paesaggio, which basically means the map of the characters of the landscape, used by the Tuscany, the Tuscany region, and it is clear that we are seeing landscape characterization for planning and management. And I list here a lot of different characteristics of this tool. And especially, I would like to emphasize this point: character, a distinct, recognizable, and consistent pattern of elements in the landscape that makes one landscape different from another, rather than better or worse. This is important for me because when you are mapping something inside the HLC or inside the landscape characterization assessment, you are not judging what you are doing. You are not judging a feature like better than another. You are just defining this feature as something typical inside the landscape. For instance, fields or woodland or settlement, and so on. In this tool, the landscape characterization assessment, you have, first of all, you want to manage the landscape, you want something practical. But when you are thinking about a specific feature, a specific area, you must understand also the historical perspective, no? The timing and the time perspective, exactly. So chronologically, when people arrived in this place, started cultivating plots and something like that. This kind of assessment don't answer this kind of question about time and historical problems and so on. You need another specific characterization, which is the historical landscape characterization. In this case, this is an example coming from the Charente-Limousin in France. It's very quickly, and it's a quick tool in this case. It's a quick characterization, means a rapid historical landscape characterization. It was, these pictures showed the situation in 2010, and this was the first characterization that I really came across. I mean, because in that period, I arrived at Newcastle University, so I started studying this method. You see, you have a different vision of the landscape. In this case, every types, because this historical landscape characterization works on types, which means you put together the feature who have a specific history and a related history. So you put together all the fields realized after the 1850th century, for instance. Putting everything together, you have the pictures of the landscape today. That's another difference between a normal landscape archaeology or an ancient topography or an historical landscape research from a point of view of the classical point of view, from carried out by a classicist, no? Or an archaeologist, a classical archaeologist. You don't study immediately ancient times, ancient period or medieval period. You must start from the landscape now, from the landscape of today. This is very important for me because that's the only way in which you cannot make mistake when you interpret them, when you need to interpret your excavation or your research, and the first step in the historical landscape characterization is to make a survey, no, of the existent landscape. You must know really well the landscape because, first of all, you have to decide which kind of types you must use, you have to use. And to do so, to decide this list of types, you must really understand the landscape as a whole. So basically what I've done is to follow this example made by Santana and Jane Webster, and to work on historical landscape. I specifically I chosen to follow this vision because I think this is the most complete way to understand exactly all the phases in the landscape, all the temporal, the time phases in the landscape. You must, as a Graham Furlow underlined, historic landscape is the physical remains on and other historical attribute of the present landscape as indicators of how that landscape character has developed over time through the interaction of people with their environment. What does it mean? It means that an historical landscape preserves now all the physical remains coming from other people's activity. And when you put everything together, it's easier not to overlap interpretation. When you have, when you have an industrial zone, when you have a road, when you have a set of fields, when you have a settlement, you must, even before, for instance, making an excavation, digging, for an archaeological excavation, you must understand that the history that has produced the industrial area, the road, the settlement, and to do so, it's better to have a complete pictures of the landscape now. Is that clear? So you have to, first of all, you have to put everything together and to understand the relationship between each feature. After that, you can start digging, you can start your archaeological excavation, but you must understand why Pompeii is now in that way, why Villa Adriana is now in that way. Now, Villa Adriana, for instance, and we will see a picture at the end, it's a very complex archaeological site, and it is not a villa abandoned at the end of the 3rd century, because after the Roman emperors came the people of the area, and they used Villa Adriana for materials, taking materials, digging, and planting whatever they want, cultivating. So you have a long line of history, even inside the site, that you usually consider abandoned. You know what I mean? So only when you start from this landscape, now, today, you can give a value to all these activities, which are absolutely basic to understand even the classical landscape, the ancient landscape, because the ancient landscape doesn't exist anymore. It's a product of a long transformation, and you now can use the GIS. You can put, if you are a classical archaeology, usually you can use a GIS, and you put together all your data about ancient history, about ancient archaeology, and after that you make a query, you ask the GIS, show me the situation, the situation, the possible situation in the ancient time, so the kind of question. Well, could be the results can be something near to the ancient situation, but basically it's not possible, but it's not that, exactly that. You know what I mean? So the only thing that you have is the current landscape. And the only thing that you really can understand, first of all, is the current landscape. And this is basic for this method. So there are different historical approaches. Here, this is a list. And this is another example. Even in the same period, Santana, the keep of Santana, I studied with Professor Tanner, so of course I'm using, I'm still learning on his articles and studies. This is the characterization analysis carried out with Jim Crow. And you can see exactly No, the specific parcels, no, they make on from this landscape. Basically, they read the landscape, choosing different types, you know, characterizing this landscape with types, features, groups of features, historically defined. You can say, okay, this is a very interpretative tool, no? But it's your idea, or your can say, this is the result of your research. So you decide a type, and after that you use the type to compose this kind of puzzles. Okay, but basically, can you prove that a field is a medieval field? Oh, there are several different ways to prove things like that, but actually. The same equipe, or different equipe, but the same center, is trying to use also other different methods to reinforce, I can say, to strengthen the possibility of dating a type. In this case, in Catalonia, this equipe is trying to apply this luminescence, which is basically I didn't have any possibilities to apply this technique. But it appeared to me that is really useful in understanding the chronology of the terraces. Using this method, Professor Turner is dating some terraces of Catalonia, starting from the late Middle Ages and the early modern period. So, because terraces are really widespread in Catalonia, so it is really useful to understand this feature in order to understand how people cultivated the land, how people producing fruit and whatever else. This is an historical character type from Vilalta. These one are from other two case studies, Balaguer, Castello de Farfania, and L'Espagnol. And this is Herrings, the other first archaeologists who applied this method, basically created this method in southern England. And to sum up, we say historical landscape characterization projects are map-based, but also with textual output. They use geographical information system, GIS. Their main sources are digitized modern and historical mapping, are digitizing modern and historical mapping. There is a variable scale and a resolution fit for any purpose. Database record various attributes of selected polygons, and the GIS allows variable querying, searching, and display. Based on all these different projects, I started my project, which basically was intended to understand the transformation of the landscape in the UK, Northern England, and southern Italy in Lazio. During the Norman period, what I was trying to do was to understand how the Normans changed, or if the Normans changed, the landscape that they found in Italy and in England. So I had to start studying the Northumberland HLC, the Northumberland County Council Historical Landscape Characterization, which gave me a several good several good suggestions about how to conduct, how to complete a field research and a characterization, a new characterization in Italy. So basically I started from there, and I realized that I had one big problem, so the difference in cartography. So in England I found a very structured organization called the OES, the Ordnance Survey, which provides a lot of different maps, various scales, really detailed, as you can see. In Italy, I didn't have the same possibility, so I had to calculate this problem very carefully. And so first of all, methodologically speaking, I started from the characterization in England. As you can see, the landscape is really peculiar in its own way, because really there are a lot of fields and with different histories, and the characterization gave to me a clear picture of the different types of fields. In this case, now we have different type of fields, and each field has a different chronology and a different history. And what I done at a certain point was to combine archival data with their own type, so the types produced by the English characterization. So I started producing several records about these people, and so I done for the Durham characterization, from Durham and Unlink characterization, until the moment that I started my research in Italy, which was a completely different story. I worked in the Lower Valle Latina, which was part of the land of San Benedict, belonging to the monastery of Monte Cassino. And the good point was that I had a lot of medieval documents preserved in the archive at Monte Cassino, and also other maps produced by other different offices, medieval offices, like in this case the Aragon map for 50 centuries. But I started from medieval Norman castles, and specifically in this case the Norman castle of Rocca Guglielma. As you can see, there are three different main features, which are the Norman castle, medieval village of Rocca Guglielma, and the medieval village of San Pietro in Curulis. This was the main monastic site on field, which is the church now, is the former church now of St. Stephen. And as you can see, other kind of maps, in this case drawing coming from the archive in Monte Cassino, the 18th century. And this is my second characterization, basically, the most detailed, where you can find my terraces. During this characterization, I find out what Sam Turner found in Spain, which means a landscape of terraces, a landscape of very detailed and complex terraces. And I started classifying these terraces following the same division, the same types of historical terraces, and as you can see that this kind of landscape is exactly an archaeological feature on its own. It's not a question, it's not only about terraces. We have a similar we must follow a similar procedure for the fields, recognizing the fields. I base a lot of my research on ancient maps, but not cartography as in England, so but documents, archive documents from the Italian offices. And in this case, you can see my situation was completely different from the British situation because I had a deep transformation of the landscape. Specifically, I found out that a lot of the ancient agricultural sites were transformed into industrial sites, but I continued. I applied a deep survey in the archive. I carried out a deep survey in the archive, tried to find my historical data inside the document because I didn't have the same possibility than in England. So I'm going to show you just some pictures, and in this case, Castrum Ambrisi, you can find in English. There's an article, my article in English about this characterization. And okay, this is the most important map for me because it's a Borbonic map, comes from southern Italy, and it's the ancient one. And you can understand that I cannot use this kind of map to understand the border of my types. So I need to to define my types using applying another kind of another decision, making different decision. So at the end of this quick presentation, I would like to ask you, basing your observation on what I said, or I was trying to say, what do you think about this landscape, which is the landscape of Villa Diana and the environment? Can you call this landscape an ancient landscape or a Roman landscape without understanding that time has passed also for these structures? And what do you think about this? What do you see? Not what do you think. What do you see? Don't be afraid.
Okay. I make an attempt. So we see a satellite picture,
yes,
showing the actual situation of Villa Adriana, which is pretty much in the center. That's the current landscape of Eastern Lazio, let's say. Mm-hmm. And of course we have like some archaeological features that you can point out here, and mm-hmm. if you zoom in, you see more of those features, and then of course you have a number of processes, as you mentioned before, that led to the actual state, like starting with current landscape.
Which is the main type, no? Using this, let's use this word, this term, type, no? Which is basically
well, let's say
I meant
present agriculture.
Agriculture, yeah. But specifically what? Agriculture, okay. You can see a lot of fields in this point, okay. So first of all, you want to carry out an excavation of Villa Adriana, no? Okay. And you decide to go here, no? First of all, which are the main features that you see here? All in this place. This part of the...
That will be a riverbed, like a valley, and yeah. They will have accumulated material from alluvial material. So,
yes,
for example, I wouldn't start digging there, for example.
Sorry?
I wouldn't start my excavations area.
But you must.
Okay.
You must. That's the point, you must. You must because you are an official archaeologist and you have to, I don't know, there's you must dig a ditch, no? for something like. So you must start from there. You said a very interesting thing. Now there's the bed, there's a river stream. Okay. So what you see basically is field, a complex of fields, woodlands in some way, some sort of woodlands. Okay. Here. Do you see this? Okay. Now, what is the type that I can use to characterize the landscape of Villa Adriana now, in this moment? Which kind of cultivation are around Villa Adriana, this place? Olive trees, exactly. Which are basically very important now at Villa Adriana. Now we are producing olive oil in this period, you know? So, and in this case, here, almost the same things, no? So olive oil, etc. And in this place, in this part of the landscape, what do you see? A settlement, no? A modern settlement, as in this case, an industrial settlement, okay? Also here, another kind of fields, but here, there are cultivated fields, and here, just this one is cultivated, and the other can be called waste fields, and so on. And using the HLC, you start characterizing each type chronologically, no? And at the end, you have you can start. At the end, you can start for your excavation, for your study, being aware of what you really have in front of you. That's the point. So, thank you very much. I think I can. People think, okay. No.